following is a compiled summary of documented cases involving subject DB. Each case represents one attempt by the subject to participate in a standard human institutional process. Each observation period lasted 7 days. Each case raised procedural questions that remain unresolved. No explanation for the subject's continued participation has been formally documented. He simply arrives, attempts the process, and generates paperwork that nobody knows what to do with. This is the complete record. Volume 1. What if a skeleton tried to get a job for 7 days? On the first day, he arrived before sunrise, and nobody could confirm if he had ever gone home. By the second day, his arm detached during a handshake with upper management. He picked it up quietly and continued the interview. On the third day, Human Resources asked him to look more alive. He wrote that down. By the fourth day, he had won Employee of the Month. Perfect attendance, unlimited overtime, 0 bathroom breaks. On the fifth day, clients complained that he kept smiling at them. Unfortunately, the smile was structural. By the sixth day, management moved him to night security. The cameras stopped glitching whenever he stood nearby. By the seventh day, the entire office was wearing red headbands. Nobody remembered why. By the end of the week, the skeleton was running the company. Human employees had begun asking permission to leave early. What if a skeleton tried therapy for 7 days? On the first day, the therapist asked him to describe his emotional baggage. He wrote down all of it. By the second day, the therapist asked him to open up. His ribcage already was. On the third day, the breathing exercises became complicated. Nobody knew where the air was supposed to go. By the fourth day, the skeleton stared at a fern for 11 minutes after being asked how he felt inside. The therapist wrote several pages of notes. On the fifth day, group therapy became tense almost immediately. Nobody was emotionally prepared for perfect eye contact. By the sixth day, his emotional breakthrough triggered a fire alarm. Patients evacuated calmly. The skeleton remained seated. By the seventh day, the therapist requested 2 weeks off. Nobody asked further questions. By the end of the week, the skeleton was helping other patients process their feelings. Most of them appeared more frightened afterward. Case 002 was archived shortly before the facility changed ownership. What if a skeleton tried online dating for 7 days? Initial observations suggested compatibility concerns. He created a profile. Under body type, he selected lean. He uploaded photos. The application repeatedly asked if he wanted to add more flesh tones. He received his first match. She stated that she preferred men with visible structure. This was considered encouraging. He then spent 6 hours studying human flirting behaviour. Results remained inconclusive. The first date was eventually scheduled. Witnesses later reported prolonged silence and unusually intense eye contact. Restaurant staff initially assumed the situation was performance art. Nobody wanted to interrupt. By the end of the week, multiple users had updated their preferences to include red headbands. Internal researchers eventually discovered that the skeleton had become one of the highest rated profiles on the platform. Nobody could explain why. The event was ultimately classified as concerning. What if a skeleton joined a gym for 7 days? On the first day, the skeleton arrived 30 minutes early and waited outside until the doors opened. Several members assumed he worked there. By the second day, he completed every warm-up exercise with complete seriousness. Staff became concerned after realizing he had no muscles to warm up. On the third day, a personal trainer attempted to explain proper form. The skeleton wrote everything down carefully, despite having no visible changes in posture. By the fourth day, other members had begun quietly adjusting their routines around him. Nobody wanted the treadmill beside his. On the fifth day, management complimented his consistency. He had now spent 12 consecutive hours near the free weights without signs of fatigue. By the sixth day, newer members assumed he was some kind of advanced fitness goal. Nobody could explain why. By the seventh day, people had begun arriving wearing red headbands. Nobody remembered when it started. By the end of the week, the skeleton had become part of the gym environment. Members no longer asked if he belonged there, only whether he was using the bench. What if a skeleton went through airport security for 7 days? Initial observations suggested the system was not designed for this. On the first day, the skeleton entered the security line with complete procedural confidence. Several passengers quietly changed lines. By the second day, the body scanner detected 206 unidentified objects. Secondary screening began immediately. On the third day, agents requested all metal items be removed. The skeleton considered this very carefully. By the fourth day, he had no pockets, no wallet, no detectable organs. Documentation continued. On the fifth day, staff began calling him passenger DB-005. Nobody remembered who started it. By the sixth day, X-ray operators had stopped calling supervisors. They simply nodded. By the seventh day, travellers were removing their shoes before the checkpoint. Some had purchased red headbands. By the end of the week, a new screening category had been created. Human passengers were now asked one question. Are you carrying any additional bones today? What if a skeleton went back to college for 7 days? On the first day, Human Resources enrolled him in mandatory professional development, after determining he lacked several modern workplace competencies. By the second day, he attended every class 37 minutes early and quietly stared at locked classroom doors until faculty arrived. On the third day, student advisors reported discomfort after observing him taking notes without blinking for nearly 4 consecutive hours.
Now let us examine the fundamental structure
By the fourth
of the
day,
narrative.
several students had begun copying his study habits, despite concerns regarding overall survivability. On the fifth day, campus records noted an unidentified older man repeatedly appearing near the philosophy building. Internal review later identified him as the same background supervisor from airport security footage. Staff classified the event as an external variable. By the sixth day, Subject S had begun asking questions during philosophy class. Questions such as, why pursue knowledge if certainty never arrives? And whether procedure itself requires permission to exist. The skeleton attempted documentation immediately. No forms appeared effective. By the seventh day, faculty discovered him sitting silently outside the classroom beside Subject S, as if waiting for instructions that never came. The institution later reported that both individuals had attended class, but nobody could confirm what had been taught. What if a skeleton rescued animals for 7 days? Initial observations suggested the facility was not designed for this level of documentation. On the first day, he located an abandoned kitten beneath a park bench and immediately initiated intake procedures. 3 forms were completed before the kitten was moved. By the second day, he rescued a frightened puppy from a storm drain and filed 3 incident reports regarding unauthorised barking activity. The puppy was formally processed. On the 3rd day, volunteers observed him escorting a duck family across a parking lot while holding a clipboard labelled Migration Compliance Review. Traffic stopped. Nobody questioned the cones. By the 4th day, he had established a temporary rescue office with colour-coded emergency binders and mandatory orientation packets. Attendance was not optional. On the 5th day, a raccoon entered the facility without authorisation. It somehow received employee access credentials. Documentation of this event remains incomplete. By the 6th day, rescued animals had begun waiting in organised queues beside designated intake stations. Nobody understood the system. Cooperation levels remained unusually high. By the 7th day, the shelter itself had adopted his procedures. Volunteers wore red headbands, paperwork was filed before feelings were experienced. The animals appeared emotionally supported. The raccoon had not returned its badge.
You watched all of that. Thank you. I have attempted many institutions. None of them have asked me to leave permanently. I consider this progress. There is a comedy set. I performed it. It went fine. There are also shorter videos. Some involve a raccoon. Volume 2 is in progress. The archive has received documentation regarding a special operations training program. Several procedural concerns have already been noted. Thank you for your documentation time. I will see you in the next case, presumably.
But here, in the climate-controlled savannah of Sector 4, a different kind of apex predator waits.